Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Last week, we had a guest on who talked about the Texas voting bill and how it's nothing. It's just like a nothing sandwich. It allows for 12 days of early voting, longer hours of voting, mail-in ballots for everyone who asks for one. You don't need any reason or excuse, any good excuse or anything. All you have to do is write your last 4 digits of your Social Security on it to prove who you are. Yet, Jen Psaki, the White House spokesperson, said this is the greatest challenge to democracy since the Civil War. Are you kidding me? 12 days of early voting and mail-in ballots for everyone is the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War? All right, so that was last week. The latest of this whole ridiculous made-up drama is that the Democrats in Texas have fled to Washington, D.C. They are engaged in a sort of filibuster as they go to the nation's capital to pressure the senators there to end the filibuster, is what's happening now. Let me give you the bottom line, and then we'll spell it all out. All right, then we'll give you the lay of the land of this pitiful performance art. People making these voting laws, right, or people outraged about these voting laws are entirely making up their outrage. It is completely fake. It is complete performance art. Republicans should propose a bill that only allows male landowners who pass a literacy test to vote. That needs to be the proposal. Male landowners who can pass a literacy test. And then watch the left freak out. And then come back and say, all right. Fine. We'll let women vote too. And you don't have to own land, but you have to be a citizen. And you can only vote on election day. Compromise? Deal? I don't know. Republicans need to play the Overton window game. Instead, we're like, okay, 12 days of early voting. Okay, fine. Everyone gets a mail-in ballot. Here you go. Like, what is that pathetic? No, you vote on election day. That's it. But because the Republicans don't have a backbone, they're just Democrat light on all this stuff. And the Democrats still, kick up dust and have a little temper tantrum about the whole thing so that they can get 20 days of early voting or whatever it is they want. All right, so here's the drama. The Democrats posted a selfie on the bus. So like 54 Democrats or something in the House of Texas have left the state. So here's a selfie of them on a charter bus going to the airport, smiling for the camera. And I don't know if you can notice, see the woman on the right? See the empty seat behind her? It's not exactly empty. That is a giant case of Miller Lite sitting on the seat. Not a great look for them. Then they took this picture. This is them on a chartered plane without masks, flying to D.C. I don't know who in the Democratic Party in Texas thought that it would be a good idea to charter a plane to D.C. and not wear masks, and why they thought that would endear themselves to Texans. And finally, here's a picture of a bunch of Democrats standing outside their bus. This is after they landed in D.C. This is on the airport. And here they all are spaced out, recording selfie videos of themselves, telling their constituents how heroic they are for taking such a stand for the American people. And here's one of those examples. This is James Tallarico or something. I don't know. He's some Texas Democrat. He said, I just landed in Memphis on our way to D.C. Thank you all for your well wishes. We left behind our families, our livelihoods, and our beloved Texas. But our sacrifice is nothing compared to the sacrifices that brave Americans have made throughout history to protect the sacred right to vote. We're prepared to stay out of Texas for the rest of the session. And this decision wasn't easy. Many of my colleagues left kids, elderly parents, and sick loved ones. Many are risking their day jobs and their seats in the House, but we won't sit by and let democracy wither on the vine. Oh man, the dude's on vacation. He's acting like he's George Washington crossing the Delaware. Dude's on vacation. He's acting like he's off to Afghanistan to hunt for bin Laden. Guy's on vacation. He's acting like he's like literally in the Alamo. Dearest mother, the trip so far has been arduous. The chartered flight to Memphis taking nearly an hour 20. I fear, I saw this on Twitter, I'm stealing it. I fear my fellows lose hope. Yet armed with nothing but our Miller Lite and private planes, we soldier on, mother. I only yet pray that the DC hotels have free Wi-Fi. Yours lovingly, James. I hear that just before the show started, they were on I don't know where they were. I just heard that they were somewhere in DC singing We Shall Overcome. 12 days of early voting. No excuse. Absentee mail-in ballots. I imagine them on the steps. I haven't seen it yet, but I imagine them on the steps of the Capitol singing We Shall Overcome. I look forward to seeing the video. What a bunch of clowns. All right, let me put to Cuba here because these things are actually related. Because the people of America, these idiots, have no idea what communism or voter suppression really is. They have no clue. Imagine talking to a Cuban about how voter suppression in America, it's real. It's real. Oh, really? Did your last person who won get 100% of the vote? No, we have only 12 days of early voting. Here's a nice little meme to drive it home. On the left, you have a communist in a capitalist country. And on the right, you have a bunch of capitalists in a communist country. Now, we're told that these protests in Cuba are because of COVID and the lack of vaccines. I'm going to go with yes and. It's not that that doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm sure there's a kernel of truth to that. But it's really about a lifetime of misery and oppression from the communists in Cuba. People who are waving American flags are not waving them because there's no vaccines. That doesn't make any sense. What's the connection there? They're waving American flags because it's just like the Hong Kong protests on the bottom right and protests in Iran on the top right there. That's what you wave when you want freedom. You wave the American flag. And it's the same thing in Cuba, people waving the American flag. And we have people in America waving the communist flag. Weird, huh? Wanting America to be a communist country. They would go to Cuba, you know. But they're just not doing communism the right way over there. It's not real communism. It's been real communism. It's just not anymore. And that's why it fell. Oh, darn it. You know, I would go and live in this communist utopia over there, but they're just not doing it the right way. If only they were. If only they were, then Cuba would be the utopia that I talked about in my high school or in my college seminar. It would be a utopia, and they wouldn't have people swimming in shark-infested waters to get to America. Alas, this is the acting assistant secretary of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere. It's like Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs or something like this. This woman's like one step higher in the bureaucracy than me. Julie Chung. Peaceful protests are growing in Cuba as the Cuban people exercise their rightful right to peaceful assembly, which they don't have, by the way, to express concern about rising COVID cases and deaths and medicine shortages. We commend the numerous efforts of the Cuban people mobilizing donations to help neighbors in need. Yes, as they're getting shot in the head by the Cuban government. It's not about COVID. Maybe that's part of it, but that's not the root of it. Someone, in response to that, posted a picture of people tearing down the Berlin Wall and wrote, yes, I'll never forget those protests against the German measles. It's not what this is about, lady. Now, this whole thing puts this talking point from the left, puts them in a bit of a sticky position, because we've always heard from the left for a long time that Cuba has amazing socialized healthcare. It is fantastic. It is the best healthcare in the world because they truly care about their people, unlike here in America. Even though Castro himself was flown to a hospital in Spain when he was dying, you would think that would have put an end to that talking point. But either the healthcare system in Cuba is amazing, or the healthcare system in Cuba is so bad, it's causing all this social unrest. Which is it? It wasn't long ago. Nicholas Kristof in 2019 in the New York Times, he said, Cuba has the Medicare for all that many Americans dream about. You know, Michael Moore and Bernie, they've called it the best healthcare system in the world. But of course, it's terrible. It's always been terrible. This is everything over there is. So how do they get around that? How do they get around that hypocrisy or inconsistency or blaring lie that they have a great healthcare system? How do they get around that? Well, it's easy. It's America's fault. Because everything is America's fault. It would be the best healthcare system in the world. That's the thing. It may, so they've been saying it is. It is the best healthcare system. Well, now it's proven that it's clearly not. And then they say, well, it would be if it weren't for the great Satan. This is CBS Morning News yesterday doing their best communist propaganda.
The Trump administration passed many more regulations, many more sanctions against it, which basically has cut off all income coming into Cuba.
Portia Siegelbaum is a CBS News producer based in Cuba.
I think the Biden administration, he at least said at the beginning he was going to review this policy and make changes, but nothing has happened.
Yes. It's always America's fault. You want to know the truth of that? Cuba can trade with any other country in the world. We have not blocked them off from the world. They can trade with anyone. Yesterday, I looked at their biggest trading partners. Their biggest importing partners are Spain, Russia, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, France, Poland, China, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, Mexico. I can go on and on. They can trade with every country in the world. I just saw before we went on the air a ration chart of what you're allowed to have in Cuba. In Cuba, you're allowed 5 eggs a month. Is that America's fault? Of course not. There's no way that a trade embargo with America has crippled their country to the point where it is today. Instead, the misery that the people of Cuba have felt for decades now might, it just might, have something to do with that whole communism thing. Maybe. But here's where it gets interesting. I've been musing about this and thinking a lot about this last day. China especially, but China and Russia, they both have a vested interest in making sure that their little communist colony doesn't fail. So the question is, who has a greater interest? Who wants it more? Who wants it more? The communists who are in power in Cuba and the Chinese, or the Americans with this island right off our coast? Who wants it more? Do the communists want communism there more, or do we want freedom there more? That's the question. Who wants it more? And I would argue, unfortunately, that the communists have more fight in them right now than we do. They believe in what they believe in more than we do. And that's what it comes down to in the end. Putin was right. I forget when this was, a couple months ago maybe? I don't even think, well, I think it was a couple weeks ago. Sorry, my timeline's a little messed up. But Putin was, Russia shot a missile at a British ship in the Black Sea near Crimea. Did you even hear about this? They shot a missile, like a real actual missile, at a British ship. Russia said it was in Russian waters. And Putin was asked later, he said, what if you hit it? What would you have done if you sank a British ship last week? And you know what Putin said? Putin said, even if we did, the West just doesn't have the heart for war. Even if this started World War III, well, it wouldn't have started World War III because they wouldn't have done anything back to us. I think he's right. We don't have the heart. We don't have the patriotism. We don't have the intellectual ideology to fight another war. Even if it's a war we need to fight. Like, I'm not saying we need to go back to Afghanistan for another 20 years. That's what I'm saying. But even if there's a war we need to fight, and I don't even know if this one in Cuba is. I'm talking hypothetically here. I don't know if we have the heart or the stomach or the mind to fight even when we need to. Right? So it's saying that you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Mark 12:30. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Do we love our country? Do we love the principles that we say we believe in with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength? Think about that, right? Like our heart, like do people in America really believe that America is the greatest country in the world? And do we know why? Could we even back that up with our mind intellectually? Most people can't even name the 3 branches of government, let alone why America is the greatest country in the world. And do we have the physical strength? Like literally, do we have the physical strength to fight for this country and fight for freedom? I don't think so. The communists do. And because they do, we won't fight and they'll win. And that is a very sad state of affairs right now. Please disagree with me. We talked to 2 people on the show yesterday about this. And I asked them, I said, is this going to pop off? Because I got all excited about it. I said, is this going to pop off into some big freedom movement in Cuba? And they both said, nah. The guns are going to come out. They're going to shoot and kill the Cubans. They'll bring in some people from Venezuela to shoot and kill Cubans because what do they care? And the Cubans are going to get scared and go back to their houses and be grateful for the rations that probably Biden will drop off with some extra vaccines. Right? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the end of this, is Biden goes, a la Obama dropping off pallets full of cash to Iran. We drop off pallets full of vaccines to Cuba in order to bring peace to the island and rescue their people. And all that really did was bail out the commies yet again. Watch for that, I wouldn't be surprised. And Cuba, just like China, shut down their internet. They could shut down their internet, well, I say like China, which is true, but the Cuban internet is set up, it's Huawei, it's set up by the Chinese company and controlled by China. So they shut down the internet so that no videos can spread around the country and nothing can spread out to the world and nothing about the world can come back to Cuba. So we in the world, we just go on acting like nothing's even happening over there. And we live everyone out there hanging out to dry. And people are gonna die. And we don't care. I've heard apparently we have the ability to send internet into Cuba so people can still get their messages out, but China's gonna fight back and won't want us to. And then once again, Cuba is the little kid stuck between mommy and daddy fighting. US versus China this time, but it's always been US versus communism. The problem is there seems to be a lot of communists here in America, too. This is some kid on TikTok. He was asked why communism is good. Here's what he said.
Communism is good because true Marxist communism is as close to a utopia as we can get. The reason you equate communism with North Korea and that's a bad thing is because of Western propaganda, capitalism, McCarthyism, Red Scare. The capitalists over your head want you to think that it's bad so they can keep their capitalism. The Marxist definition of communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society. That definition has never been reached in the real world, unless you count all of human history up to the last couple thousand years. No working 60 hours a week to have food in your stomach and a roof over your head, accessible health care, and free to do anything you want to do without the chains of money.
I love it. It's not real communism. So that guy's not going to fight to liberate the Cubans. He's on Castro's side. And there's a lot more of that guy here than we like to think. Coming up next, you think woke teachers are bad? Wait until you meet the woke doctors. I'll tell you the latest from it, the Journal of Medical Ethics. It's next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Static Crusaders, you thought woke teachers We're bad. We got plenty of those. Way worse than woke teachers are woke doctors. This is from the Journal of Medical Ethics. All right? The Journal of Medical Ethics. This isn't just some random guy on Twitter or like that last guy with a random guy from TikTok that we just shared, right? This is from the British Medical Association. And they're talking about transgendered kids. Okay, now there's no such thing as a transgender kid, but let's just roll with it here. So the question is, what should be, again, Journal of Medical Ethics. So what should the doctor's role be when a kid with gender dysmorphia comes into your office? Okay? What's the role of the doctor, the medical health professional? So here is this person in the Journal of Medical Ethics. And I quote, if the medical community is to take LGBT testimony seriously, as they should, then it is no longer the job of physicians to do their own weighing of the costs and benefits of transition-related care. Assuming the patient is informed and competent, again, we're talking about children here. We're talking about children, 5, 8, 10, 12-year-olds. Assuming they're informed and competent 10-year-olds, then only the patient can make this assessment, because only the patient can access the true weight of transition-related benefits. And here's the key. Moreover, taking LGBT patient testimony seriously also means that parents should lose veto power over most transition-related pediatric care. Are you with me? So you, if you're a doctor, you must obey LGBT people, whatever they say. You, as the doctor, cannot give your medical assessment, your professional assessment of anything, because you're not that person, and you can't and don't and cannot understand the benefits of transitioning like they can, as if that's even a thing. But then the worst part of all, right? It's one thing to say, oh, doctors, you shouldn't even give an opinion on this. Some 10-year-old wants to cut off their genitals, and you, I don't know, don't think that's a great idea? Who are you to say, doctor? You don't really understand what this 10-year-old does about cutting off their genitals. If you really understood what they wanted, what this 10-year-old wanted, then you would go along with it. But you can't. And instead, you're imposing your own cis heteronormativity on them. And that's racist and sexist and awful and terrible. So you just better remain silent. Do whatever the 10-year-old wants when it comes to their pediatric transition care. Or how do they word it? Transition-related pediatric care. But then the worst part of all is not only the silencing of the doctors. Parents should lose veto power. Parents should lose veto power. So doctors should have no say, and parents should have no say. We should leave it all to the child when it comes to their very dystopian termed transition-related pediatric care. Are you paying attention yet? Children. We're talking children, 5-year-olds, 8, 10, 12-year-olds. Now you're saying, oh, Slater, jeez. Again, with your overreacting. Who cares? My kid's not transgender. This doesn't affect me. It's not about the transgender kids. It was never about the transgender kids. It's about what's being taught to your kids in school. All of this is being taught and pushed. And what is our world? What is our society when kids are taught and people start to think that you can change your gender on a whim? And also simultaneously gender doesn't exist. And what is a society when doctors, and even worse, parents, have no authority left? So I want to talk for 2 minutes here about where this comes from. It comes from John Locke and a little bit of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but mostly John Locke. John Locke had this idea of blank slate. The blank slate idea of human nature. And this is the dominant theory of our age by the intellectuals today. And the idea is that you come into the world as a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa. Have you heard that before? Tabula rasa. It means a blank slate. You're empty. You come into the world this blank piece of paper. There's nothing about you at all, blank slate. And you are entirely then a product of your experience. You have no innate characteristics whatsoever. Everything, therefore, about you is a creation of society. Now, this has been debunked thoroughly by science and common sense, but it's still the dominant idea of our age. And you see it with transgenderism. It's just the logical end of it. So the progressive thinking is that you come into this world as a blank slate, right? You're the only animal where this is true, by the way. But you come into the world as a blank slate, so you can decide what gender you want to be. You don't come in as male or female, right? You enter the world like this. You don't come in as a man. You don't come in as a male or a female, right? That's not a blank slate. A blank slate is a blank slate. So you decide whatever you want. There's nothing innate about you. Your genitalia, your chromosomes, your genes, none of those exist. It's all blank, and it's entirely up to you. And how dare you? How dare society tell you that girls wear dresses and boys wear pants? That's just a social construct. There's nothing innate about that. That's just society imposing their desires on the blank slate. That's just the patriarchy imposing their way on the blank slate. How dare you say that girls play with dolls and boys play with trucks? That's oppressive. So this person in the Journal of Medical Ethics clearly believes that theory, to the point where they will say out loud in a medical journal that a child should decide over everyone else, doctor, parents, reality, what gender they are. Are you with me? So the thinking is, if evil society tells kids how each gender should act and what each gender should wear, and if evil society tells kids what gender they are, right? This is doctors assigning gender at birth. And if evil society is doing all these things, well then no part of society should have any say anymore. No part of society should have any say. Everyone must be silenced, including the doctor and the parent. That's the end of the tabula rasa view of human nature. And it's also a bit of child worship as well, which is another progressive idea. It's the innocence of babes. Oh, children, they're so smart. They're so wonderful. Unlike adults who have been corrupted by life. Right? So we need to listen to the children always. This is why you got a lot of environmentalism, right? Greta Thunberg, it's all about worshiping the children. So bottom line, the true story is, the root of all this, the left pushes transgenderism because it strikes a blow directly at one of the most fundamental aspects of the Bible and Christianity, and that is that man is created in God's own image, and that God created man and woman. The more overt and obvious the Bible is about a certain thing, the more overt the left must be in attacking it. And this is pretty clear. God said, I've made man and woman, so the left must come in and say there's no such thing as man and woman. Oh, and by the way, God didn't create anything. You created. You create you. You pick your gender, even as a child. Coming up next, there's a coup against our Constitution, and it's happening right before our eyes. I'll tell you all about it next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. What if there was a coup going on right now with our Constitution, right in front of our eyes? We didn't even see it. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the national, the National Popular Vote Compact or something like that. And that would be an end around of the Electoral College. That's a type of coup that's happening right now as well. But there's a lot of other forces coming together. Jim Hanson is here. He's the president of the Security Studies Group. And his book is called Winning the Second Civil War Without Firing a Shot. And he wrote a great new article in the American Conservative all about this. Jim, how are you, brother?
Doing great, Mike.
It's really good to talk to you. Let's give me your background first that you think enables you to see this when maybe other people aren't.
Well, one of the things that we do in special forces is incite insurrections, conduct guerrilla warfare, and work in information operations. And unfortunately, I'm seeing all the signs of those happening on both sides right now, both on the extreme right and extreme left. But most dangerously, I'm seeing our government use counterinsurgency operations against our own people and propaganda against our own people and move towards totalitarian control measures that I've never seen anywhere except in third world countries overseas or the big totalitarian communist regimes like China and Russia.
Whoa, Nelly, Jim, those are big. That's a big claim. Back it up here, because I see
wrong.
it, but I don't have the words for it. So what's a maybe define insurrection, or maybe define counterinsurgency? What are we talking about?
Instead of digging into those, how about let me give you an example of a policy that Biden's team just put out. It's the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Extremism. And this is, the way they're going to deal with anyone who's conducting domestic terrorism in the United States. The problem is, once they get to define who is a domestic extremist and then can use the tools of our counterterrorism arsenal against them, we're in trouble, because they have a very broad and dangerous interpretation of who is a domestic extremist, and it leans mostly to groups on the political right. And they specifically say that. They say there is a racial extremist element, but white supremacist, and they completely ignore the year-long riots and insurrection conducted by Black Lives Matter. So I think there is a bias and discrimination, and now they're starting to use these tools of state power to push back against those on the right.
That's so crazy, because I'm so with you, Jim. But then I keep going. I say, no, that would never happen. I literally do that. It would never happen here. Like I've spoken out so much against the people who say it would never happen here, but I find myself even doing the same thing. Like, yeah, they're crazy Democrats, blah, blah, but they would never do that. They would never. They wouldn't. Yeah, they may have the power, but they wouldn't. Tell me they would. Or tell me I'm right. I don't know.
No, I wish you were right, but they are doing it. And I'll give you another example. Another piece of the domestic terrorism extremist strategy is a partnership with the social media companies in Silicon Valley. Now, right now, those companies have had an active partnership to deal with things like election interference and actual terrorism from overseas, and things we would want them partnering with our government to do. But in this new strategy the Biden team put out, they explicitly state that they're going to partner with these groups, the Twitter, Google, Facebook, and the rest, to push back on misinformation and disinformation as they define it, not in any meaningful way, any subjective way, or any objective way. It's the subjective opinion of the tech tyrants in Silicon Valley and the Biden administration, who wants to control the political right. And they're going to partner together to shut down speech they don't want. Essentially, they're outsourcing censorship under the First Amendment to the tech team, or to the tech tyrants, which is what Trump's lawsuit claims.
Yeah. If I can only take that as half a step, maybe a full step further, I read this morning in Politico, they casually, in an article about COVID and Fauci and vaccines, they casually mentioned that the Democratic Party wants to monitor text messages and prevent people from spreading disinformation on text. So everything you just said about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that's all true. But now they want to do it through Verizon and AT&T. That's pretty wild.
And what's scarier is when I used to talk about this, I'd say, it's not like they can get your cellular provider to cancel you because they don't like what you're saying, or your electricity provider to cancel you because they don't like the things you're doing in your house. Now I have to take the cell provider out because they're going there. They're shameless and they have a goal. Don't anyone doubt for a second what the goal is. It is state control of your lives, because they don't like the decisions people are making, and they want to stop us from doing things that they believe are dangerous.
Yeah, can you go one step deeper on that thing you just said? What is the drive? I need to understand the motivation. You and I don't have this drive in us. We don't have this desire to control.
And
they do.
That's why I wrote the book. I believe that they want to fundamentally transform, per Barack Obama, our republic into a totalitarian style state. Now, they would call it social democracy. They would never go there. Some of them will actually go to saying communism's never been properly done. But as we see in Cuba and other places, no one living under the system they want to impose on us is happy with it. So they literally don't believe now that the Constitution protects rights. They believe it is an impediment to putting the social engineering programs they believe will help us be better people into place. So they have to put speech codes on top of the First Amendment. Hate speech is not covered, as 40+% of millennials believe. They want to take away guns because that's a way, if they get too far down the tyranny path, Americans were supposed to always have one last resort. So they look at the Constitution now as something that was a dusty old parchment written by bald white guys in wigs that's no longer relevant.
Obviously, these people doing that. I want to define, I got two questions. Who's they? Let's do that first. You say they. Who's the they in your scenario here?
I consider, at this point, I would go as broad as the Democrat Party and everyone to the left of them. It is run mostly and pushed by what I would call the woke left, and we all now know as the woke left, the activist left. And in the book, I discuss how Obama empowered them. Black Lives Matter came into being under Barack Obama. You know, he told the people on the left that their grievances are real and they should push to have the country fundamentally transformed to fix that, to make equitable outcomes. So the people who believe you can both socially engineer people and that equality of outcome trumps equal opportunity are now in control of the Democrats and the political left, and they're winning. That's the real problem.
All right, last question for you, and everyone needs to go buy the book. Obviously, they've crossed many lines for you where you're concerned. You wrote a book about it. What's your next line? What's the line for you when you're like, oh man, like this, there's no going back now after they do what? Like what? And another way of asking that is like, what should we be on the lookout for that's next?
I actually put that scenario in, and it was winning the Second Civil War without firing a shot. But the point where that goes out the window could happen when they pack the Supreme Court and add speech codes, thereby gutting the First Amendment. And then they go to the point of starting to confiscate weapons in a meaningful way, thereby taking away the protection of the Second Amendment, which is all that protects the rest. So those two things combined, to me, is a bridge too far.
First Amendment, I agree with both those, obviously. All right, Jim Hanson, go buy the book. It's called Winning the Second Civil War Without Firing a Shot. Winning the Second Civil War Without Firing a Shot. Jim, grateful for your insight and your work. Thank you, sir.
Great talking with you, Mike.
Have an awesome day. Let's do it again. Let's talk on the radio, too. Coming up next, we'll talk about Cuba. Right? What's going on there, as they may have their own civil war with shots fired. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, some very bad but not surprising inflation numbers just came out. We got to talk about that, but we also got to talk about Cuba with our next guest, the tax reform expert, Julio Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. Let's start with Cuba first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We mentioned at the top of the hour that there's this complaint from the left that Cuba is in a miserable economic situation because of the embargo with America, and we made the point that they can trade with every other country in the world, and they do, and that's not the reason for their economic problems. And we obviously say it's communism. What specifically, like what economic factors are true on the ground, or economic regulations are true on the ground that keep people in such misery, even when they can trade with other countries around the world?
Yeah, I think they've just been hit so hard with the pandemic and not having the ability to really manage it well. And that's created they didn't have any tourism, which is their number one income source. So that's what they use. And ultimately, not having that income basically has forced the situation where they have no food, no water, no medicine. And you're seeing, something that we haven't seen in 60 years, which is a major revolt. And I think that's going to continue. And certainly, these people can't no longer survive, and it's really moved from socialism to communism because they're not getting the part of the socialism, which is the medicine, the food, the water, and certain necessary supplies.
Let's bring it to America here. What do you know about inflation? What did the latest numbers say?
Well, the inflation continues to soar, and that's really because labor cost and the supply cost that, it's that supply and demand, right? We don't have enough labor, we don't have enough supplies. They're all intertwined, and that creates the inflation. Plus, we've created regulations now that have cut off our oil supplies from our own domestic production. That hits the tanks, right? And so we're seeing that nationwide, and you couple that with just getting opened up, and I think that's been really critical to our inflation that's skyrocketing.
Is there a difference? We're going back to economics 101 class here. Is there a difference between inflation that's caused by the factors you just talked about versus inflation that's caused by spending money we don't have and printing money? Or is it the same in the end? It doesn't matter.
Well, I think they go hand in hand, right? I mean, certainly there's both components are creating the inflation, right? I think right now the supply is the massive reason, but no doubt printing money is going to be hyperinflation as well. And the combination of the two are going to be snowballing, no doubt about that, and continuing to escalate, especially if we pass a $7 trillion infrastructure bill where we print, another $5.8 trillion and get that out. I think that'll create even a further escalation of inflation.
That's so insane. What should people do with their money right now as this tidal wave is coming and most people don't even realize it? What's the wise move?
Yeah, and what a great question, because when we look at this tax reform that they're talking about taxing unrealized gains. So do you want to put that in the stock market when all of a sudden you could be taxed on something that you haven't even, you haven't gotten the value of that, right? It's just kind of a value that's been escalated by the markets, but you're getting taxed on that. It's an unrealized gain, right? We have never had that kind of tax, but he wants to do unrealized gains tax. He wants to do that on estate tax, death tax, and capital gains. So I think that's difficult. So maybe it's not the stock market. And I think people are on the sideline right now and saying, well, if you're going to double the unrealized gains, capital gains, I'm not going to go into real estate. I'm not going to buy a business. I'm not going to invest in someone selling a business. So are you better off just keeping it on the sidelines, keeping it in the bank for a better day? Because when we have, inflation, we'll have higher interest rates. So, maybe the safe bet right now is to just park it in the banks.
Hold on. What's this? What would the unrealized gain tax be? Is he throwing out a number?
Well, he wants to put that at 40.8%, so almost 41%. So can you imagine?
Wait, hold on. So let's say I put my money in a stock. I put $1,000 in. And over the year, that $1,000 is now worth $5,000. So I have $4,000 of gains, but I haven't cashed out yet. He would tax me at the end of the year on the $4,000 of gains that I don't even really have yet because I haven't realized it.
Yeah, that's what they want to do. That's in their bill, right? And it could be.
But then what happens?
Stock.
What happens if the bill? Sorry to interrupt you one more time. Sorry, and then I'll let you go. What if the stock the next year then crashes, and now I have none of that money? So I was taxed real money on something I didn't even have, and now all that money that I supposedly had is gone.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, they would have it go both ways, right? So say you had a loss, you could report that loss to offset income in the next year. But the big thing is, imagine people are going to get out of the market. So you think about everyone that has their money in a 401k, and now the market's just going to go down and plummet, really, because everyone's going to get out before this passes. And if they know it's a certainty, you'll see the stock market collapse.
Yeah, that's insane. And you're right, that's the main point. You're right. It's more so than even the investors, like the retail investors or whatever. It's everyone's 401k would be affected by that. That's crazy. That may be the craziest idea I've ever heard. Is that a serious proposal? Like, are they going to do that?
Well, I mean, listen, it's in their proposal and it's being backed by the majority of the Democrats. So, and they can do it through reconciliation, which means they don't need any Republicans to vote on this. So is it certainty? It's not certainty because we only need one Democrat senator to say no. So, then it really comes down to, are they going to say no, or are they going to get, are they going to ask from Biden for something in return for that vote?
Yeah.
And so it comes down to that.
And if it's not now, it's next time. Certainly. I didn't even realize that was a thing they were trying to push. Julio Gonzalez. Julio, sorry for interrupting you so much. I was just flabbergasted. I wanted to make sure I was hearing you right. Tax reform expert on Twitter. Thanks, Julio. Appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That is insane. True story. Mike Slater. Do it tomorrow. Spread the word.